just get started. I don't know if other people are going to join us or not, but uh, again, for those of you who have joined us, we're going to be using Slido today. If you use your cell phones, you can go and scan this QR code. Otherwise, you can go to slido.com, enter in this 5-digit code 47591, and this is what we'll be using for the Q&A section. So again, here's how you're going to go and join that. I'd like to thank Joe Justice for joining us tonight and taking time out of his busy schedule. He's parked at a Starbucks, you were saying?
Yeah, that's right. In North Bend, Oregon.
And you have what is it, a race truck, a Tesla race truck right now?
That's right. That's right. I'm in a Tesla race car work truck. Yep.
Oh, cool.
Because why not? Why wouldn't you do that, right?
Well, why not? So what we'll do is we'll start off with again, we're just going to go through a little bit of a background on Joe, and then we'll get into what we have outlined in our agenda in terms of agile transformation, digital transformation here in Calgary, transforming education. Feel free to go and use the chat as well, but we'll be using the actual questions on Slido. You can also upvote the questions, and I'll take a look at those, and then we'll, based on those, we'll answer or ask those questions to Joe in the Q&A section. And feel free, maybe there might be something else that comes up. But again, yeah, slido.com, it's 47591. So,
Chris, super kudos to your microphone setup. You sound like a radio talk show host. It's a luxury to listen to you. It's like velvet chocolate.
well, that's that's nice of you to. I mean, I guess it should be Chris who has set me up. He's an audio specialist and stuff. So yeah, it's pretty good. So
Chris,
again,
Long, you make guitars?
No, I maybe one day.
Is that
I
a real
collect them right
background?
now.
Is that a real background or a Zoom background?
No, the real background. Yeah,
That's a lot of guitar necks I see there.
I have just over 130 in my collection right now. So
I look forward to having a guitar party, which I hope involves alcohol, at your place.
yes, yeah. No, when you move to Calgary and help us with our digital transformation, that's what it is.
It's on. It's on.
Yeah,
An even exchange. Parties at Chris Hong's. Joe
yeah,
does agile and digital transformation. Done.
yeah.
Sold.
all right, perfect.
Well, I guess we better introduce Joe beyond the great introduction he already gave between Starbucks, the Tesla, and the module homes and space exploration. But maybe Chris, you want to kick it off?
Yeah, no, for sure. So maybe if you want to just, Joe, give us a little bit about your background and your bio.
Yeah, I'm ready. So, hi, I'm Joe Justice. I was born legally blind, and I was super clumsy, like the clumsiest person you ever met. Just walking into door corners, and no one noticed that I was legally blind until I was 7, because I was actually really good at drawing, and I'd put my nose so it touched the paper, and people would be like, "Well, he draws so well. Like maybe he's just really clumsy." And so seriously, till I was 7, my own parents did not notice that I was legally blind. I mean, I could sort of see like light and dark and fuzzy shapes, but legally it was at the blind, past the blind limit. Um, Once people figured out I couldn't see anything and started to go through therapies and later a bunch of eye surgeries. I don't wear glasses or anything anymore. But that took a lot. It took a lot of therapies, like eye exercises and 3 surgeries. But yeah, it all works now. I wrote my first sentence and I found it actually not that long ago, and it completely describes the rest of my life. The first sentence I wrote, as far as I know, it's the very first one. I think it is I want to find the secret to all knowledge and share it with everyone.
Wow.
Now, I don't know why I thought that when I was like 5 or whenever I wrote a complete sentence with my nose pressed to the paper, right? I don't know if someone seeded that idea to me or if it was original, but it certainly sums up everything I've done and tried to do in my life. So I started my own car company because I wanted to learn about cars, and I had this burning desire to have a like super hot, cool, fast car. Um, and I set 4 world records with it. Um, Lowest cost car to production, fastest car to production, most lowest fuel consumption of a gasoline vehicle that's road legal ever. Like really competitive global class world records. And I realized I had learned something special. I could compete in a highly competitive global industry and win. Um, and what it looks like allowed that to happen was this business process called Agile that's super normal now, but was crazy cutting edge then. So all the stuff that anyone may have heard about Agile business or Agile project management, that's what I was using. And it worked really well in the applications I was using it in. In fact, it crushed incumbent industry where they have phases. We're going to like plan something, we're going to analyze that plan, then we're going to build it, then we're going to test it, then we're going to deploy it. I mean, that's all good. It's just really slow. So this Agile method is another way to have really high quality in far more compact cycles. And I learned that really well, and it rocked for me in automotive. Well, then I became a consultant. I didn't really know what consulting was. Accenture had a joint venture with Microsoft. It's called Avanade. It's still around. And it's to implement Microsoft tech in companies through Accenture and Microsoft together. And Avanade called me and said, would you like to be a consultant? And I'm like, what's that mean? And they go, you're going to get on a plane every Monday, and you might not know where you're going until Monday morning. And then every Thursday night, you'll fly back from wherever you were. Would you like to do that? I was like, that sounds interesting, but what's the trade-off? Do I get to put down roots anywhere? Do I really know enough that I'm going to be useful and impressive to these people? What do I need to know? And I bravely said yes. And I got a backpack in the mail. Like it was totally James Bond stuff. Like I'd never met anyone in the company. This is a legit big kids company, right?
Yeah.
But my orientation was a backpack in the mail with a laptop in it. I'm like, okay. And then there was an envelope with a plane ticket. And all right, here we go. I've never met anyone in the company. I don't know. And what that company wanted, where I flew to, was Agile transformation. And I did know a little bit about it at this point. And I've now been at that for 16 years. And I'm widely considered, whether it's true or not, I'm widely considered the world's expert in Agile transformation, which is moving businesses from these phase gate review processes to it's actually the same. It's doing all the phases super fast in little cycles. And I'm really good at that. And I'm really good at explaining how and mapping that to companies. And it's worth millions of dollars. And I made a little over $1 million US before tax, after tax, a lot less, every year for many years. And instead of buying Lamborghinis and yachts, I've yet to buy a Lamborghini or a yacht. Instead, I put it all into my, most into my open source car company, which is the only nonprofit car company in the world. I put more money into it than I've taken out. And I learned a lot about robots and autonomous robotic manufacturing that way, because I could afford, with that level of income, to buy some pretty cool robots and use them myself, like in teams of 4 people or 5 people, these Scrum teams. And by doing, I learned a ton, and I got to work with Starbucks. I got to work with the U.S. Air Force F-35 stealth fighter, the F-22 stealth fighter, the Saab Gripen stealth fighter in Sweden. In Canada, Royal Bank of Canada, which is a huge financial institution. I don't know how many people outside Canada appreciate how massive RBC is, but they're absolutely in an agile and digital transformation too. And I got to be part of their team to do that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's me. I'm this dude that wants to learn the secret of all knowledge and share it with everyone. And I've been incredibly privileged to learn from Bill Gates. I work directly with Bill Gates. I've worked in Amazon, not directly with Jeff Bezos, but with his teams. For Elon Musk, I didn't work directly with Elon Musk, but for his teams. I've worked in Facebook. I've worked in all 5 of the wealthiest companies in the world. I've incredibly privileged life. And what I really like to do, what really gets me pumped, is to learn something that seems to be a valuable solution and share it immediately as broadly as I can. Now that gets me into a lot of heat, right? Because a lot of companies like to protect their intellectual property. Now Tesla doesn't. They famously open source almost everything.
Yeah.
But 3M, another one of my clients, likes to close source and patent everything. In fact, the way to get promoted is how many patents is your name on. That's directly correlated to your promotion opportunity. And so they really don't like people who are just open and talk about the business secrets. And I won't break non-disclosure agreements, but I will avoid clients based on how strict the NDA is. Because what I really want to do is learn a bunch of stuff and share it super aggressively, super fast. Yeah, that's me. That's what I'm up to.
Well, that's a big testament to Joe, right, Chris? If you remember when we first reached out, so we discovered Joe from a TED Talk, amazing TED Talk that I thought of. And so what came off of that was, researching this guy, and we see that he's attended like every single university on the planet in terms of guest lectures and doing like speeches and other things like that. Like, I mean, pretty heavy hitters on there. And so I was like, hey, Chris, check out this, like, who's this freaky guy? Like, he's just like well-spoken, super smart, just doing all these things, constantly learning, super humble and modest. And Chris was like, well, why don't we just reach out to him? And so that's where we ended up. And so I got Joe here to speak with, originally some of our students, and we've opened it up to kind of the broader community, and want to kind of share it through our War Stories podcast program. But yeah, that's I think it's a big testament to Joe's character to say how much he's actually constantly learning and giving back. It can't be understated enough. So, but especially considering, as we say, like not only in the event description, but definitely his very well deserved and very long CV. So.
I'm really grateful for that, Chris Hong. Now, I'm glad this has been recorded, because I'm going to play you saying that back every morning when it's rainy or gray or sunny. And I'll be like, look, Chris Hong said I'm a good person. Chris Hong says I'm a good person. And I'll make my eggs and start my day. Yeah. So thank you, Chris, very, 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 very much.
But for sure.
We do appreciate that, Joe. I mean, it was funny because Chris, he just sent me those TED Talks. We found it really enlightening. And then we thought, let's, especially now with the education sector where we're doing everything remotely, why not go and reach out to people outside of our geographic area, right? And, you were really prompt to even get back to me. And this, by the way, for those who are attending, it all started with a tweet and direct message from there.
That's how this is supposed to work, right? People find people that we want to collaborate with, and we just do. I think that's how it's supposed to work. Oh, so you were silly enough to ask me for advice to students. That's it, man. And I think everybody already knows this, so I'll just like reinforce that just reaching out. Yeah, 99% of the time the people will be too busy. And they're supposed to be. That's what you want them to be. You want them to be too busy kicking ass to talk to someone they don't know. That's a good thing to happen. Not because you're not awesome, but because they're simply too busy kicking ass. But every once in a while, one of those people, same level, same caliber, it's not that you weren't good enough for the other ones, they were just busy. But one of those people who's that same level, same caliber, just as desirable to collaborate with, will be between projects or have just finished one, or have just gotten stuck, or whatever it is, and they'll have an hour to think clearly and reach out. And because they're awesome, their habit is to reach out, right? So they're going to want to do that as often as they can. And you'll catch one of them at that moment. And it'll be someone you'll really want to collaborate with. Now, your job, if you're up to it, is to then put everything else on your life on hold. I'm not even kidding. Everything. So part of your ninjutsu is to have a life that you're able to completely hit pause and still have the parts of it you love the most to be there waiting for you whenever you come back, in one day or 10 years. So someone who can take care of your pets, if you have any. A suitcase that's ready to be packed or packed already. You're already showered and shaved. Your CV is already up to date. Well, who uses CVs anymore? Your LinkedIn, whatever it is. So that you're ready to say yes. Because like say you tweet at Elon Musk and you hit him at the right time and he says, yeah, come over. You'd better come over then. I mean, that's your shot. So your job is to have a life that's ready to pause and do it hard and full. And here's the other thing. When you hit up people that are super cool and successful, it's like pro sports. So your nutrition has to be on point. Your sleep has to be on point. And it's okay if it's not now. You just have to want it to be and be willing to say, look, I'm not going to do whiskey for a while I figure out. You treat it like you're training for the Olympics. And it's the only thing you do. You do it full on, and you do it for as long as your body will let you do it. And that's the whole recipe. That's the whole thing. So that's my advice to students or to anyone. That's it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Maybe if you want to just tell us a little bit about the Scrum method and the Justice method.
Totally. Scrum is taking, most business still, maybe just less than half now. Still a lot of business, used to be most, now just less than half maybe, does what's called waterfall projects. They fund projects usually once a year. They have an annual funding cycle. What are we going to do in this big company? Procter & Gamble, Johnson & Johnson, Exxon Valdez. What are we going to do? What are we going to fund for the year? Then they plan those. They kick off a planning cycle and then an analysis cycle of those plans. And there's funding gates between all of these. So you might have funding to do prototyping, et cetera, or exploratory work. But typically it's plan, analyze, build, test, deploy. That's typically the shape of it. And yeah, maybe 49% of companies all over the world still do that. And it works fine. It has a lot of quality gates. If used effectively, it helps catch dysfunctional projects and defund them before they're through the pipe. The problem is humans get really attached to their projects. And so very rarely those projects are actually killed. So all the phase gate reviews that slow it down don't end up killing projects. But that's the idea. And if it's used effectively, it does work. It's just slow. Agile projects do that in about 1 week increments. That's the average. So about once a week, they fund. So that's called an Agile funding cycle. It's at least once a month, if not faster. In a company like Tesla, it's about every 3 hours. I hope I didn't just blow up my NDA with that one. No, Musk has talked about that on Twitter. No, we're good. Whew. Okay. So the idea is the shorter the cycle, the better. That's the more agile you are. And agile is the same definition as any agility. You have a force vector and you want as much force as possible, but you want the shortest amount of time and the least amount of energy to change the direction of that powerful vector. That's agile, right? So same as any physics. We're saying the same thing in business. So it'd be the number of people and the number of robots and the number of scripts or AI stuff, basic machine learning supporting you. How quick can you change the direction that's all going? And the least amount of energy to change the direction that's all going. That's business agility. So you can switch from making shampoo to gumballs or gumballs to cars or cars to buildings. That's your agility. How quickly can you do that? And for a lot of companies that would take 10 years, they would die, which is what we call not agile, right? They're brittle, they're fragile. If their industry changes, if COVID happens, they die. And that happened to a lot of companies this year, right? Agile companies love things like COVID. They're like, sweet, we get to change super fast. We're good at that. And our competitors are all going to die. And then we can hire their top people. And that's exactly what happened. So Agile, you do plan, analyze, build, test, deploy, but you do it in the shortest responsible cycle. Now, a common failure is a big, slow company will say, let's get Agile. Let's have planning sprints. Let's plan in 1 week sprints. There's no feedback loop. You don't know if your plans are any good. A sprint has to include release to the customer. Has to. So it's what's the shortest amount of time we can plan something new, fund it, go all the way through every necessary responsible step and release to the customer. And for a lot of companies, 1 month is pretty aggressive. For super fast companies like Tesla, it can be 3 hours. In Amazon, it's minutes. And truly, from idea to funded to it's on Amazon in minutes. And they do that through a lot of robots, scripts in software, robots for physical stuff, a lot of AI assistants. It's still humans running the show in most cases, but there's a lot of algorithms to validate your assumptions that are running full time. And the more that you have, that's what DevOps really is, by the way. If you've heard that buzzword, DevOps, it's basically machine learning augmenting your ability to test and release as fast as you can. So you just think of cool stuff, and you have machines that help you take more and more types of cool stuff, test it, and deploy it immediately. And that's how you get down to like sub-minute sprints. And companies like Amazon have invested in that heavily, and they can. And Tesla has invested in that heavily, and they can. A lot of companies haven't yet, and so we'd say they're not yet agile companies. And that's where you all come in, graduating in the new world order, helping companies think, act, and behave that way. So Scrum is how agile companies manage themselves. So you've got this agile company that's potentially changing funding once a week or even faster. What does a manager mean? What does a VP mean? What does a CEO mean? And I'll just be honest, it actually doesn't mean that much. It really doesn't. So how do you function? You have these Scrum teams, and they have 3 roles. It's a game. It's like playing Monopoly at work. So you anoint people in these 3 roles. You choose these 3 roles, and someone's got to be in these roles or the game breaks. It's like if you're playing baseball and there's no pitcher, like, how do we play? It just doesn't work. Luckily, there's only 3 roles. There's the product owner, and I enforce that role is rotated once a week to avoid creating siloed thinking. So we have broad opinion. Their job is to check, is what we're building the absolute highest value, coolest thing we could be building? So you want a broad range of perspectives auditing that. So I enforce that role rotates about once a week. Are we building the coolest, highest value thing? And they get to choose for the amount of time they're in that role. They're super powerful. They get to choose, what are we going to build? Now, everyone can lobby them and say, I wish we would do this. Here's why. But the product owner does pick. Now, hopefully they have good listening skills. So it's not just only their own brittle opinion. Hopefully they really listen to everyone, but they do get to pick. And that's another good reason to rotate that role, so it doesn't go to their head and become too much ego. But in any case, that's the product owner. So Steve Jobs was absolutely the product owner at Apple. And he was lucky enough to be visionary enough. He didn't have to rotate the role very often. He was truly gifted at, are we building the highest value thing, the coolest, highest value thing? He was super at that, which is the product owner role. And Elon Musk is okay at that, but he actually aggressively rotates that role with Franz last name, the designer of many people at Tesla, who maybe aren't as charismatic. They maybe don't get as much Twitter time, but he totally rotates that around. If you follow any of the investor meetings or board meetings at Tesla, you'll see those other people that Elon aggressively puts in front of the microphone, even if they're too shy to take it. And they're also these visionaries. So he has a huge team of these total badasses who do this stuff. Now, that's one of the 3 roles. The second one is the Scrum Master. And for people who are familiar with lean management, lean manufacturing, lean design, that's the Scrum Master's world. Is there anything we cannot do? Is there anything we can skip? And everyone tries to help, but the Scrum Master really focuses on that. Is there any meeting that we can cancel? Is there any meeting that I can say no to? Is there any product I can say no to? Can I tell the product owner, this product that you thought was super valuable is actually a bad idea, so we can cancel it? Like, that's super Scrum Master job. And they look at the team to say, is there anything frustrating the team? because happy teams are faster. There's huge research to support that now. Ever since Harvard took on the happier class as part of their core curriculum, Tal Ben-Shahar guest lecturing that, they conducted a tremendous amount of research on, are happier people at work truly faster, more effective, higher quality? And it certainly looks like the result is a resounding yes. So that's Scrum Master's job, is looking at your team. Is their body language low, or are they engaged and proper and ramrod straight spine? What can I do to help? Is something really frustrating the team? Can we get a robot that does that for the team? Whether it's a script or a machine learning set of scripts or a physical robot, often that's the answer. Can we automate something that's frustrating? Or can we make a chart that helps us make a tricky type of decision? So we basically solve that pretty well once, so we can refer to the chart in the future and just not be frustrated by that tricky type of quagmire again. So that's Scrum Master world. And again, I recommend they rotate about once a week, so you have a wide range of opinion and everyone learns that skill. Then you have the most important role, the development team, because if they're not there, nothing gets built. The product owner might help build, the Scrum Master might help build, but the development team is whoever we need to full-time build this thing with quality. And that's who they are. They're engineers that are excited to design and test. That's what the industry calls full stack. Full stack meaning you can go from design to deploy yourself. Now, you got a whole team helping you, so don't sweat it. But you do know, you're at least conversant in all of it. It's not like you're just a designer and then you hand off to development. You just hand off to manufacturing, or you just take from manufacturing and only test. That's way too slow for agile companies. So your development team is full stack. You're at least interested in learning design all the way through deploy. At a company like Tesla, there aren't jobs for just test. There aren't jobs for only design. That's not how it works. It's too slow. At Procter & Gamble, there are, but that's also why people are saying, are they going to survive COVID? So we'll see. We'll see. So there are plenty of companies that will hire you if you just want to do design or test, but a lot of those companies are in mass layoffs right now because they're having trouble being globally competitive in times of change. So Scrum is those three roles. And yeah, they run 5 events so that you plan and fund incrementally on short cycles. And so testing is super important, right? If you're making a new product once a week, testing is even more important than if you're releasing a new product 2.5 years. So the 5 events of Scrum have to do with where and when does testing happen, where and when does user acceptance testing happen, etc. So there's 5 events that we do, meetings, and there's 3 outputs, these 2 different types of to-do lists for funding, and then the product itself we build. And that's the game of Scrum, the monopoly at work of Scrum. It's 11 rules. It's an 11 rule long game. And it helps break slow habits and build fast habits. And then maybe that takes us to what the justice method is. I realized that when I was in a lot of companies going really, really fast, we weren't doing Scrum. But Scrum was the closest named thing to anything we were doing. So I was very happy to call it Scrum because I didn't have any better name. But what I kept running into is the companies would get excited and they'd hire hundreds of agile coaches and Scrum coaches, and none of them could do what we actually needed to do to speed up, or almost none of them. It was super few. And at first I thought maybe they're not charismatic enough. Is that it? They're just not charismatic enough. They're an uncharismatic but highly technically competent person. I believe that wasn't the case. What seems to have been the case is there's a gap between what super works and only Scrum. And Scrum's super close, honestly. Like, it's a nice, simple thing. But it looks like these strategies like rotate who plays the product owner absolutely matters, or people get upset and feel left out. And rock stars leave because they feel unempowered. And on these projects where rock stars want to stay, and new hires want to stay, and even people who aren't very good want to stay and become rock stars, there's this magic that happens, and it seems to be these other practices. So I was not humble at all and named it after myself, and I hope that wasn't a big mistake. We'll see. But that's the stuff like rotate the product owner role, rotate the Scrum Master role. Scrum doesn't say how funding is accomplished. So I put in Agile Finance, which is super simple. You just make funding decisions when stuff goes in the backlog. I don't mean to be too nerdy using words like backlog, but the to-do list of projects, if it's on the to-do list, that means it's funded. So whoever put it in the list must have funding authority. And then there's a little conversation on how that is accomplished. But so the funding decision gets built. There's automated testing decisions, a high bias towards automation, which a lot of Scrum people are coming to find out about anyway. But I simply start there. And the litmus test for me is, if I rolled out this method at Tesla, would they speed up? And if we rolled out vanilla Scrum at Tesla, no, it would totally slow them down. It'd be imposing these 5 events on an arbitrary cadence, and it would slow the company down and not add any benefit. So what's the gap? Because what does work there is super similar. It's not far off. Scrum is very recognizable there. It's a higher focus on this thing called the definition of ready and definition of done. It's much more specific on how funding occurs. It's mandatory full stack. Scrum likes full stack. The justice method is mandatory because otherwise it would slow Tesla down, right? So that's a litmus test. Would it speed Tesla up? And that does mean everyone is trained in robotic maintenance, like legitimate hydraulic fluid draining, everyone. I don't care what your role is. You need to be able to change hydraulic fluid. You need to be able to reboot the KUKA robot, the FANUC robot. You need to be able to do that because that's where the real speed comes from all across this design, analyze, build, test, deploy cycle. So there's cross-functional robotics training, and there's super basic cross-functional machine learning training. Don't feel freaked out if you haven't done it before. It's the super basic stuff I'm talking about is not much harder than using Instagram. So if Instagram isn't scary to you or Snapchat isn't scary to you, then the level of machine learning I'm talking about is approachable to you. And yeah, machine learning can get super deep and super nerdy, and that's cool, but you don't have to do that. But you do need to know how to identify when we've reached a local minimum, a local maximum, and you need to help the algorithm realize it needs to reboot. And that's not much harder than using Instagram. It's actually about the same level of difficulty if you have a decent front end. So yeah, coexisting with cobots is part of what makes the justice method actually work. Yeah, and that's where the speed, and then you get companies like Tesla. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. I mean, you've kind of touched on this already, Joe, in terms of agile transformation in the age of the pandemic with COVID-19. Now, which businesses would you consider have been successful and have endured the pandemic? And do you think it's because of their agile pivoting ability?
There's been two types of huge successes during the pandemic, the way I'm trying to slice it mentally. And one is they happened to be in an industry that became absolutely huge, like Netflix. Netflix was already sitting squarely, and they were visionary, but the pandemic totally made sense for Netflix and companies like Zoom. The pandemic totally made sense for companies like Zoom. Now, those are hyper agile companies already, but their agility isn't why they boomed in the pandemic. They were already an established player in what ended up being a super valuable spot. Now, you can't predict that. It either happens or it doesn't happen. Now, how quickly you recognize that's about to happen and invest in those companies is something an agile investor can do, or an agile student, how quickly they choose that's the company they want to intern in or apply to, right? So you can notice the trend and jump on board. But those companies were already in the sweet spot. The other type is The company demonstrates such a quick pace of interesting, quality, valuable new product. They're so quick at being able to develop something new that people like and get it to market in a way that it's usable, that the stock market says you'll survive anything. And those companies have boomed. And it doesn't mean they were in the right product space. Automotive in general took a huge hit in the pandemic. People are like, we're going to stay home, right? And we were told, you must stay home, right? And automotive cratered. Tesla didn't. And it wasn't because they make cars. It wasn't even because they make solar panels. It's because people said they can make anything they want. And in less than a month, it's going to be in production with such high quality that it's going to crush whoever the incumbent was. So we trust their ability to iterate at high quality. So not just that they're Scrum, not just that they're Agile, is that they actually have a track record of, in a very short amount of time, releasing something entirely new at high quality. And that alone isn't enough. It's also exciting. The customers want it. There are some companies that are super quick at adapting and releasing product, even with high quality, and nobody wants it. There are super agile companies with the product owners just aren't appreciating the feedback loop in a useful way, and they're dying. So you can die in a super agile company, and there's companies dying right now. They're pivoting like mad and just using up their resources. So without an effective, is it exciting, is the market interested loop, you just lose, right? But Tesla just rolled out Tesla Tequila last week, and they sold out in like 18 minutes or something, with an ultra premium $250 bottle US dollar tequila. They can do whatever the hell they want, and the market knows it. And the market says, we're just going to throw our money at you because you can do whatever you want and it's good. And so companies with that level of agility and that level of in-tune product ownership, they're winning, and they're winning hard. And those seem to be the two types: people who are lucky enough to be in the sweet spot already, like Zoom, and companies who are really good at pivoting with high quality and happen to be able to make charismatic products with draw.
So with some of that pivoting, Joe, like in terms of the agile stuff, you mentioned like even like the Tesla tequila, how much of that do you think is actually going to endure? Like, is this a temporary thing that we see just kind of for COVID? Is it changing the way we do business as a whole? I mean, Tesla's kind of already had a long trend of that, but are they going to rapidly continue to do this on a regular basis? Is that kind of what we can expect from the way we do business going forward? Should we rewrite the textbooks that way?
No, that's cool, because I think this question is actually answerable. Now, that's a really neat forward-looking question, but I actually think it is answerable. So here's what seems to be up, is if it's a free market, yes, speed of quality inspirational change is king. Speed of iteration, NPD plus NPI, new product development plus new product introduction, is king. However, there are governments, and governments are really cool things, or can be, but depending on how governments choose to be involved, they can dampen aspects or even block aspects of free market. And sometimes that's a really good thing. And that can prevent agility as king. So depending what large market governments do, they could totally put Tesla out of business tomorrow, right? The coal and petroleum lobby could win enough seats in the EU and in the United States and in China to put in place a few specific tariffs, and Tesla would be gone. They'd be gone. Their business model would be irrelevant. So I think we can answer that question because I think we do understand the levers that actually decide whether it's competitive or not. And so it's yes, but watch government. Yeah, post-COVID, agility will continue to be king, but watch government. If there's a set of protectionist tariffs put in place, whatnot, then you don't have free market there. That's what that means, right? So their agility won't be king. I mean, agility to then survive that change may help, right? But depending on how fast that happens. So government action can change that story. And that might be a good thing. Because let's say you had absolutely agile environmental catastrophe, which is basically what the petroleum industry has been for 100 years, right? Or what whaling was, 100 years before that, which interestingly was the petroleum industry. And so you have these environmental devastations, and those companies like Agile a lot. And if you look at certified Scrum Masters and who's hiring them, BP's got a ton of them, British Petroleum, and a lot of other legacy energy companies, non-sustainable, environmentally destructive energy companies. Now, meanwhile, BP is also embracing green in their portfolio too, so I don't mean to throw them under the bus entirely. But companies that also have non-sustainable initiatives, they are trying to be as agile as they can, right? So without government intervention and only, hey, make money any way you want. Animals don't have rights. The environment doesn't have rights. Go nuts. You could have super fast deforestation. And Canada could be desert, really hot desert. And deserts could be completely uninhabitable, which may happen in our lifetime. So government intervention to say, look, it's not fair to make money if it destroys capability for survival on the surface of the earth. That's probably an awesome thing to do, right? So restrictions of the free market that way, which, by the way, is what the Musk companies are betting on. They're saying we're in a position that anytime the free market is restricted in the favor of environmentalism, it makes us more money. So they're set to, if governments do the right thing, I'll say, because I'm an environmentalist, the Musk companies are set to go up 1,000x in stock. So, by the way, Joe Justice's stock tip for the day. Oh, dude, Tesla is not overvalued. Buy that. It's going to go up 1,000x. Oh my God. When I was working at Tesla, I was not allowed to say that. I retired from Tesla after this summer. Buy Tesla stuff. Oh my God, that is going to make so much money. So yes.
Sounds good. Out of curiosity, like with, the context of work from home, how do you, think with Scrum and Agile business structure? Like, why do you think it's actually maybe more conducive now?
Well, I guess the question is compared to what? But yes, small teams are easier to manage, whether it's remote or in person. If you have a 500-person team, Zoom isn't the best tool for you. If you have a 49-person team or less, Zoom's awesome. For example, I mean, there are some huge online platforms, some of them that are really getting good. But those are generally better for cross-team communication. When you have a business line of 100 teams, then you use these massive tools like Gather. And so your teams at a time join like tribes. So it looks to me that the work from home movement and the current way of working is only accelerating the adoption of agile, human first, inspect and adapt practices. That's what I seem to be observing. But can I point that question back at both of you, Chris and Chris? Are you seeing small team collaboration, like 3 to 9 people? Are you seeing project-based learning on shorter cycles, semester or less? Are you seeing those being easier or harder during work from home?
Well, what I've experienced with like the students so far, there's it's a bit of and I don't know if maybe the pandemic itself is actually another contributing factor as well, because there's who knows what people are dealing with just from a mental health standpoint, right? But if you think about it, like when Agile was actually invented, we didn't have things like Zoom or Google Docs and other tools. And, to give you an idea, like Joe, at one of the universities that I teach at, we actually use the Google Suite. And so I gave them, an exercise, and this was in the classroom. This was like 4 years ago. I'm not that familiar with the Google Suite. I give them an exercise, and 15 minutes later, the students are like, "So can we come up and present? And can I connect my computer?" And I was blown away because I don't know. I'm a little bit anti Google just because of them monitoring everything, right? But that's pretty amazing to be able to go and just collaborate at that level.
Oh, there's something coming in from Tatiana. Thank you, Tatiana. I can't read all of it. Maybe someone with an admin view can.
Yeah.
You just
So
gotta
as a
click on it, I think, Joe. But
Oh,
yeah,
there. I got it up in the
yeah.
chat now. I got it up. Oh, wow. There's a whole bunch of stuff. Chris, let me say, I think I've observed similar experiences to what you're just saying as well, Chris. I resonate with what I thought I just heard from you very strongly. Thank you for that. And I see student engagement, so I'm excited for the chat. Thank you, Tatiana and Aubrey. So Tatiana, no, that is a student's life now. That was a few minutes ago. I'm not sure what that was in respect to. As an American in Canada, time isn't that good. Tim's isn't that good. Tim Horton. Tim's Horton. Yeah, that was a while back, but thank you. As a student, I think it depends on how the class is run and if we meet in subgroups of one class instead of as a whole class. Good point. So these Agile methods are based on groups of 3 to 9 people. Now they have larger aggregation units, but under those larger aggregation units are teams of 3 to 9 people for these Agile methods. They assume that. And you can have 10,000 people, like Tesla's headquarters in Fremont, California. It's 10,000 people, but it's split into subgroups. And without split that way, if your class is just the whole body of students, then most of what I know is it's lecture at the front of the room is the best we can do, an individual assignment. Or you can spin off subgroups, right? But without subgroups, yeah, I don't know how to make that awesome yet. Maybe someone will figure that out and teach me.
Yeah, I think you kind of nailed it on the head there, Joe. Like the big part of and we're gonna hopefully touch on this, time permitting. Might go over. I don't know if you have a few extra minutes for us, but for the education industry being kind of very stagnant and laggard, and the lecture being recreated is typical, I think, for most students. That's the experience that we see, right? That the recreating how we can get the classroom. I think that's even said by a lot of profs, is that we want to recreate the classroom experience and duplicate it onto Zoom or duplicate it into the online environment and just recreate that whole, stand in front of the class, lecture, chalkboard experience. So yeah, it's an interesting perspective, and maybe we'll come back to that. Something else I wanted to touch on was you mentioned the different energy industries. We know you're an environmentalist. We've talked about that. That's very clear in your bio and things like that. I'm sure you're well aware. Us being in Calgary, that's a huge part of our kind of main stock of our economy and how we kind of look forward to things. Now, that is to say, we definitely pride ourselves on having that environmental regulation and the ability to have clean initiatives and kind of be responsible with that. But there is definitely, writings on the wall, as you say, potentially in a couple generations, if not sooner, that we're going to have a significant shift. And we've seen that throughout with COVID and that, kind of the death of the airlines and things like that, changing market forces and all that. We're curious, with those big talk about digital transformation coming out of our Calgary Economic Development, which is our kind of our think tank, collaboration with government and private industry to talk about how to look forward and improve the general economy. And so what we're seeing is this huge shift to not only digital, but how to become very agile with a lot of our environmental initiatives. I know a lot of my friends who are co-op students in engineering or in business or in environmental subgroups, think tanks, focus groups, that in all the different legacy oil companies that you talk about in town, and trying to look forward to that. So I guess kind of the questions that one question that we have, kind of summarize that's the pretext. What type of agile transformation do you think is kind of needed as a city, you know, between the citizens, through the business, to the students, to the educators, to the businesses, to the startups, you know, what kind of mindset should we be expecting? Do we want to be embracing innovation on a rapid basis? Do we want to celebrate like a waterfall approach that, you know, here's these new big things? What's the way forward? Because we're talking about, you know, Chris and I being kind of from the entrepreneurship discipline out of school, is a lot of students who want to be part of that startup culture, just having that innovative mindset within entrepreneurship, which I personally am very fond of. You know, what does the Scrum Master, you know, himself say about how that fits in to the kind of overall vision of where we're looking at as a city and as a province and as a people? You know, what should we look forward to? What should we expect?
Man, I've got an opinion. You asked me. I'm grateful you asked me. I'll share my opinion.
No, that's what we want to hear.
Thank you kindly for asking. My opinion is, as a human species, there's a hurdle that we will clear, or we won't pass the great filter, right? We won't live out among the stars. We'll die out on this planet. And my opinion is, part of clearing that hurdle is removing the idea of authority from a person to authority as an issue. So the idea of a president, it's a timely issue. We just had an election in the United States, and, you know, all around the world, there's a series of elections. That concept doesn't scale, and it's slow. And then you're tied to, by definition, a cult of personalities. And then you incent poor decision-making, because for the masses to understand a person, which is already not good, the idea that you're delegating a person instead of issues, that's already a layer of indirection that's slow. But now you've encouraged them to act more slowly, because if they change their mind based on evidence, which is what you want, that's what a sprint is, then you can throw mud at them to say, look, you changed your mind. So you want to have the least change as possible to be understandable by the semi-interested masses. So it's a double problem that leads to global environmental collapse, just to put a fine point on it, and ceasing to pass the great filter, and we die out as a species on this planet, or life as we know it does. So the cooler option, the entrepreneurship schools that cities, that towns have an opportunity to engage in, is issues as the authority, where people don't vote, for example, I'll say vote, but anyway, choose. They don't choose a person, they choose an issue. Like, let's build X. Let's build this awesome environmental initiative. Let's build this awesome energy initiative. Let's build this Large Hadron Collider, etc. They vote on that, or they choose that. Now, that's super compatible with these Agile methods. That's what these Agile methods have been trying to do forever, is you now have a to-do list that's ordered, and that's the authority. You don't have a business unit that's the authority. You don't have a vice president that's the authority. You don't have a president that's the authority. You have a backlog that we're going to do. And that by itself is authority. We agree that being on this team, or being in this city, or being humans on this planet, this is our to-do list. Now the conversation changes from, do I like them? Are they charismatic? Are they in line with my religious ideals? It changes from, how do we get this shit done? And that's the hurdle to clear. So as students in classes, I love the use of educational modalities like EduScrum, which in a really simple form is just, there's a to-do list of stuff to learn. And it takes the charisma away from the professor or the TA and puts it into the backlog. Now the charisma is used to help figure out how to do this. And it's more an engineering mind, it's more collaborative mind. And that blows away the concept of sage on the stage or lecture. It's, here's what we want to learn. Everybody divide into groups and learn it. Ask me questions if you've got them. I'm going to join groups about once a day. I'll join a different group. I'll drop in through Zoom or whatever we're using, through Google Hangouts or Jamboard, and we're going to rock this. And that's how Elon Musk works. 80% of his time is working, like actually putting cars together, because that's what you do when you're truly a badass. And there's no PowerPoint anywhere. There's no Mac Keynote anywhere. There's no Google Slides. It's not a thing. You just do. So the backlog is the authority. And that's a pivot that I think a lot of people aren't comfortable with yet because they haven't seen it work yet. So they're still saying, who's the dean? They're still saying, who's the investor? They're still saying, who's the president? And they want that because then they have a sense of security of who to look for to know what to do next. Well, that's a slow solution for the reasons I just tried to explain. And instead saying, where's the to-do list? Where's the backlog? And then when's the next meeting for me to weigh in on if that's the right backlog or not? And oh, look, we rotate the product owner role. Cool. You suddenly have a replacement for, well, you suddenly have a reintroduction of what democracy is really supposed to be, leadership by the people. And it's where you vote directly on the backlog order and not on any person's name, because any person's name is just silly. And then it's simply a funding question. Which company in Calgary is willing to solve the top product backlog item that meets the definition of done, the quality metric, at the lowest cost? And now you have free market forces. Mm-hmm. And there's no human names involved, and you win. And that is how you win. That is my opinion of how you win. And if we set up a new social structure on Mars, I think that's what it'll be. But I hope Calgary does it first.
Yeah, well, I think you bring up a good point, though, Joe. Like, regardless of all of that, you know, maybe at a societal level, it's for sure at a business level, you can kind of see the grassroots entrepreneurship kind of happening all the time, right? You have that project management to push things forward and definitely accelerate, if not necessarily kind of to Tesla's speed of, you know, overnight, but we can definitely still churn things out. So I think there's good advice there to be had for sure. Something I want to pick up on, though, is how does that kind of work, and how do you leverage Scrum or the Justice method or anything like that to the best of its ability when you're at a startup and you're very lean and you don't have a lot of people, right? Talking about early emerging tech startup or something like that, you know, one of my fellow students, something like that, fresh out of school, wants to do something, has him and his 5 friends. You know, what does that look like? How do you really leverage those skills? Should they be going to Scrum and trying to get certified, or, you know, what's the best path forward for that? You know, do they, you know, send you a tweet and kind of ask for some advice? Like, what's the path forward?
Truly playing Scrum by the book, the 11 rules, is super helpful for business. So saying, do we have a product owner? Do we think we understand what they're supposed to do so we can help them do it? Do we have a Scrum Master? Do we think we understand what does everyone think we understand what they're supposed to do so we can help them do it? Do we have a development team? Do we think we understand what they're supposed to do so we can help them do it? And then the 5 events and the 3 outputs. So there are 11 things. You don't have to go to Scrum Master class. You can read it online and do YouTubes. That said, Scrum Master classes are really well packaged. They get the knowledge in a really short amount of time. Honestly, they get people through the rules of Scrum. So I would recommend a certified Scrum Master class. I teach them, and that is how I earn my living. So you can take my opinion with every bias that you can imagine. But I'm in this industry because I actually do believe in it. I think that works. Now, there's some Scrum trainers who are maybe not as awesome as others, but that's life. So I would recommend that. But in any case, whether it's learned from YouTube, a book, or both, or instruction in class, whether you're certified or not, the 11 rules of Scrum really do solve a remarkable amount of problems before they start. And culturally, they solve some problems before they start. Now, where it can go wrong is the product owner role as written is hierarchical. And I have modified that. Not every Scrum trainer has. And if people are getting it from a book, and if they already have an egalitarian group think that's in a good way, and they introduce a product owner role, they may have just started down a destructive, myopic path, right? So there's a risk there. Especially if you use a platform that I helped write called Scrum at Scale. It then introduces product owner teams and chief product owners. It gets even worse and even slower. Um, uh, so depending what you read, you can slow down a startup. But on the whole, the 11 rules of Scrum are pretty awesome. And a lot of early problems come with, do we have group buy-in? Are we clear on what we're building? Are we building it in the most efficient way? And the 11 rules of Scrum have several safeguards in a row to help make a more lean focused product and company. So I do think that is a really good answer. Now, if you want to go way off the rails into utopia, there are even better answers. What's that called? The SEMCO method is way harder to implement. It's not 11 rules, but if you want to go deep, that's the real deal. Then there's, it starts with a lead link. You have these nodes of distributed responsibility, and you have a lead link that helps delegate responsibility. What is that called? That's even cooler. Like, that's the real deal. But again, it's not 11 rules simple. Scrum still takes like 2 days to learn. Like Monopoly, you can kind of get down in 10 minutes. And then by the end of playing it all night, you've got a pretty good theory of Monopoly, right? Well, Scrum really, even though it's 11 rules, it really takes about 2 days to even get the rules down, even though there's only 11. But these other methods might take a few months. They're worth it. They're rad. And the companies that focus on them tend to be best in their space, right? So there are even better methods, even more nimble management structures. SEMCO method and the other one that starts with a lead link. What is it called? If anyone knows, please put it in the chat.
Yeah, or we'll link to it later, when we do remember. So we'll have that. I guess to follow up on that, Joe, talking about digital transformation, you mentioned about having machine learning, having RPA and AI tools. That's huge kind of right now in Calgary. We're talking about tons of investment, lots of startup, that huge focus.
Canada is leading the world in investment, understanding, and capability of ML in general, and I'm really impressed. Well done, Canada policies, super forward looking, and then well done, Canada students and global students coming in to take advantage of that. Like, it's truly world leading. So I'm not sure if everyone in Calgary right now appreciates that, but Canada is a hotbed, if not the hotbed, of ML and AI.
Well, we appreciate you saying that, because I think we often, especially as students, as business students in particular, we always have a very strong stigma. They always talk about, well, I don't want to be classified as this oil and gas. I'm swearing off oil and gas companies when I graduate. I'm never going to do a co-op with them because it's Tesla or bust. And they say that, I think quite legitimately, I think that happens. So, I guess on that point, like, what type of agile thinking do a lot of these tech development kind of, because there's a development phase and a lot of coding, hard work in the slums before you can actually deploy any of this, right? It takes a ton of time to get like all these scripts built out and written. How does that project management or that philosophy of acceleration and changing, because you have different product owners, different people owning the code, they have their own little quirks, right? And things are going to change. Like, how do you streamline and accelerate, and how do you run sprints when you kind of want to have, or you want to get that foundation underneath you? Maybe that ties back into a little bit of that entrepreneurship point, or that startup point that I asked you about earlier, and a little bit of that philosophy. But what are some of the key principles do you see maybe out of some of the other tech hotspots? You mentioned earlier, like Washington and Seattle and San Francisco and things like that. What do we kind of see from those places, and what can we learn up here in Canada?
What I was able to learn from Bill Gates when I did get to work directly with Bill Gates, he would start every single meeting with every single one with, how much of this can we do in parallel? Every single one. And that's the go big or go home approach. And it works. It works really well. And that's the speed answer as well, or a significant part of the speed answer is, how do I restructure my entrepreneurship goal so that it is massively parallel executable? And that's some real mental gymnastics. That's also part of what product ownership is. Product owners are trained in that. And if you have a really good set of product owner instruction, you'll get a lot of good practice in that before you're even certified, if that's your ambition. But it's that. How do I take a worthy entrepreneurship goal and massively parallelize it? Now, one of the side effects of that is now each of those parallel pieces are smaller than the original whole was, right? And those are sprint length. And what those mental gymnastics yield is 1 month or less projects. Now, a whole bunch of them. And you might not have a big enough team to do them all in parallel, but you could. Now that gives a double bonus. You can now pick the order they're done. They're not dependent on each other by definition, because they're parallel executable. So this is that agile thinking. This is what an agile business plan is. It's how much of this can we do in parallel? It's what Bill Gates taught me. And so you take this big, cool goal and you cut it into a whole bunch, as many as you can, of parallel executable chunks. So if you had 10,000 people, all on teams of 3 to 9 people, you could just get it all done in a month. That's winning. Now, you, of course, try to pitch and get your group of 10,000 people. You try to do that, or your 10,000 scripts and robots, and put it up in AWS or Azure or whatever, if humans don't have to do it. Or you at least now can work in any order you want in sprints. So even if it's just you and your best friend and you're bootstrapping this, which is a really good way to do it, by the way, that really works. That's not just trite analogy, that really works. But with this cut up, massively parallelizable backlog to-do list, you now can grow whenever you get funding, because the backlog is ready for massive parallelization. You've already done that. And you can work in any chunk you need to, whichever is highest value to the investment you're currently courting, or to your first sale, which is more important than investment. Is getting self-funded is a far superior route. So that's it. It's how much of this can we do in parallel? Then what I learned working in Amazon, not directly with Jeff Bezos, but with pretty senior people, is never have your team bigger than can be fed by 2 pizza teams. And so that is your first group of people. Say you've got a really good idea, and on campus you get 1,000 people opt in. Whoo, success. No, not success. You now have an unwieldy group. You now have a management problem. So now you've got to figure out how to massively parallelize so people can work in 2 pizza teams or smaller. Because anything bigger than that chokes the company and it dies. Period. No matter how many people you have, they've got to be divided into these 2 pizza teams. So that's 3 to 9 people is what it ends up being. Then what I learned from Musk is do the hardest thing you possibly can. And at the intersection between, of course, that's a good idea, and that's impossibly hard, is what the Musk companies do only. Basically, only. That's what they do. And you know what? That wins. So you have a massively parallelizable plan. Thank you, Bill Gates. You have compact teams. Thank you, Jeff Bezos. And you say, which one of these things is super hard to do? And then you don't have to worry about patents. You can open source away, which only lets you attract top talent, because you're doing hard stuff. And you know what? Most people aren't willing to do hard stuff. And that's all the competition defense you need.
Well, appreciate that, Joe. I think that's really interesting when you talk about, not only all the different learnings you've been able to have, but also just the different kind of levels of agility that kind of need to be implemented, and the different kind of nuances that come along with that, how you need to kind of have a mindset, but also the specific plan and action to see that through. So I think that's great insight. Chris, did you want to follow up onto our next section? I've noticed there's some Q&As coming in, so we probably just want to keep this next one nice and brief so we are mindful of Joe's time and can get to some of those questions. But
absolutely. And so, Joe, like the one thing that just wanted to kind of touch on based on the agenda was just, transforming education and student success. And, with the agile mindset in education, transformation of education. I mean, I've actually this year with the pandemic, with a colleague of mine, and even Chris is working with us. We've actually created a podcast on ed tech, which we call Ed Tech Examine, and we talk a little bit about how the institutions have adapted. But what do you think are the gaps, and in terms of the from an education standpoint, and how would you go about from the agile transformation?
Man, well, project-based learning works. There's a tremendous body of evidence for that. And that's what Agile is these short projects, right? Now, self-actualization. Oh, we just lost Chris. I hope it was for good reason. It's cool, Chris. And that you have a really handsome bio shot. I mean,
He's his dogs usually like to freak out a little bit this time, and his young daughter, so that might be it. He'll be back shortly, I'm sure.
What a perfect reason to be distracted. I respect all of that. And what a bomb bio shot. That's just perfect headshot, Chris.
That's taken at the University of Calgary too. So when this pandemic situation calms down, you visit us.
I mean, if ever, we might be living in bubbles for the rest of our lives. But if I can, yes, I would like that shot. I will iron my blazer and look as sharp as possible. I'll even try to grow out an identical facial set of hair. Perfect. For education, project-based learning has a fantastic track record. Self-organization, group ownership has a fantastic track record. The problem is lecture does work. I mean, just look at TED.com. Those are lectures. They're compact, they're meaningful, they're meaty, charismatic in general, and they work. You can come away inspired, invigorated, and knowing something differently or deeper or new that you didn't know before. Lecture works, but not at all in the same way that project-based learning or self-organization works. So it certainly looks like the other problem is project-based learning is a lot higher effort. You can lecture even charismatically on autopilot. Maybe all of us have had a chance to do that by now, especially since I'm talking primarily to the School of Business. So maybe you all know that by now, that you can, with very low energy, very low caloric burn, lecture. So it's simply way easier. If you're having a hard time, you're going through a divorce, whatever it is, you can still lecture. But throwing yourself in to participate in project-based learning, that takes fitness. Like that's the challenge. So for education, if we can split the learning into project-based learning, and if we can encourage self-organization around it, the rules of Scrum help that. Super well-known, better learning outcomes, longer duration and higher fidelity and deeper learning outcomes. The challenge is going to be keeping the faculty's energy up so they can participate even remotely, because it is a higher caloric burn. It is a higher investment. So what I imagine it's going to take is more love and respect and nurturing of faculty so that they can make that pivot to Agile learning. The only defense to traditional education is going to be brand recognition. And that's already getting some pretty meaningful attacks when people realize you can buy your way into a lot of the name brand education institutions, which was always true, but now it's becoming more visible. Mm-hmm. And that may only become more visible. And that's the only defense for non-project-based learning, non-self-organization education.
I guess last question on this topic, Joe, and then maybe we'll hit up a few Q&As before we say goodbye to you. In terms of that, then, if we can't rely necessarily on the institutions, how can we talk about self-directed agile learning? Lifelong learners. We always want to be. We also always want to be learning, but it's tons of option paralysis at this point, right? We see Linda Learning, LinkedIn Learning, Coursera, Udemy. Like, you just get paralyzed. How do you stay agile, focus on, whether it's school, few other degrees, certifications, designations, your career, your startup, right? Balancing your life. How do you keep up and surf through all that noise? How do you take an agile approach to some of that, perhaps?
Well, I'd actually like to ask you that question, but I'll share the best I've got. Is it's a lot easier as an entrepreneur because your project is going to force focus, and that's going to help you find where the most rich ROI is for your learning, because it's going to drive you. And what we want is more overload of options. That's what we want. That drives up the possibility of something really good. It makes it harder to find, but that's still what we want. And when you have a curated system like a branded university, well, we've seen the myopia that creates, and so that's not actually the effective outcome. What we want is to spend the time hunting, but driven by and focused by our entrepreneurship. It's a lot harder for people who have a more broad, unfocused interest right now, which is a very legitimate phase in life to be in. And we're all in that sometimes, up and down, right? And when we're in that go broad state, super harder. So the best I've got is doing learning when I'm in a focused state. And when I'm going broad, be looking for inspiration. That's the time to consume art, to find inspiration. Now, I'd like to ask you that question, Chris, because you may have a better answer than me, and I'm ready to learn. Would you share with me how you determine where you learn?
Well, I think that's a question that I'm always having with Chris too, right? That I've been talking about what type of master's programs I want to be looking into, what other additional certifications, what add value, right? It's all these flashy buzzwords and cool names and different things like that you buy into or you hear a lot, especially as younger students, right? You want to try to, a little bit of imposter syndrome. You want to prove yourself, things like that. You want to have those taglines to add on to the LinkedIn headline and the CV. So it's always a constant struggle, and it's very hard to balance between the two. The thing for me is always to have my agile approach is to kind of juggle and cycle through them, right? And always kind of looking and reevaluating, maybe kind of as that product owner, as we describe, whether or not this is actually the best path forward, right? You don't necessarily have to see all of these things through completion. Obviously, there's financial costs associated with that, and opportunity costs with time. But I think generally that there's something to be said about whether or not there's going to be some benefit with that. But I think that's a good kind of ending point for that in terms of the discussion. Let's maybe turn to some few questions, whatever time, Joe, you have for those, and finish it off and wrap it up.
Are you still okay for time, Joe?
I'm happy to invest a few more minutes together. Thank you so much, Chris. Now, I will ask, can this be put on YouTube or otherwise accessible later?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So
Awesome.
we're gonna put it probably on YouTube, as well as it'll be edited for a podcast as well, that we'll be launching in the new year.
Yes, please. Yes, please. Yes, please.
Yeah. So in terms of the questions, I have it shared here, but just on Slido, looks like Mitchell's been pretty busy, and the number one upvoted question is, what made you focus on Agile? And with Agile funding, how much of the project cost would that relate to for a larger project?
Oh, awesome. So when I was first thrown into consulting, the world I was in, where these were incumbent companies, existing large companies, these were most of the ones who could afford consulting. I wasn't in the hot new startup yet, right? I was in the big company that wants to figure out how to be more agile. So they already had annual funding cycles. And the challenge I was running into is their product owners are trained to be entrepreneurial. And their product owners are reevaluating once a sprint, which is a month at the longest. It's the average is a week. So most of the time it was a week. They're evaluating once a week. Are we building the best, coolest, highest value thing we could? And if they change their mind, guess what happens to the funding process? They have to ask for an out of bounds exception. And that became a difficult political conversation. Well, how much money is left in this pile? Is it earmarked for this group or that group? And I realized very quickly that funding process had nothing to do with organizational efficiency, but with perceived ease of management. Look, we already agreed that the marketing department gets 2 million this month. And we agreed. It's not even what are we buying for that 2 million. It's just so much easier to earmark money than it is to do agile investments. So I ran into that constantly, that we knew a better product to make and weren't able to fund ourselves to make it, or spent 3 months trying to justify it before finally getting funded. And we lost 3 months of lead time where we all knew it was the right thing to do, just we hadn't jumped through the funding hoops. So what made me focus on agile funding was to get the product owner loop going, where we can reevaluate and execute on the shorter and shorter and shorter cadence, which is business agility, right? Because you can't pivot faster than you can fund. So that's where agile funding got involved. And then what made me focus on agile is because I had a personal passionate project. For me, it was my first car company, Wikispeed. And I was attempting to compete to be best in the world, the most efficient gasoline powered vehicle in the world. We switched to electric later. And I knew that there would be continual innovations cooler than what I knew now. So any plan I made to maximize the technologies I knew about now, by definition, would have to change for me to stay state of the art. So it was, how do I possibly maximize the speed I can change? And that's what got me interested in Agile, was trying to achieve my own personal passion project. I mean, if you're hunting for a world record, you can't use waterfall because you'd be too slow to adopt the emerging next cool thing. If you're trying to be a fast follower, even, you can't use waterfall because you're too slow to adopt the next hot thing.
Right.
Thank you so much, Adam. Have an amazing dinner. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. Another question that came through the Zoom Q&A, and this was from Tatiana. With the amount of time that you've been working with AI and robotics, do you truly believe that people can trust self-driving and AI-controlled cars when they are released?
Yes.
That's it? Yes.
Diana asks why. There's a number of reinforcing reasons. A surface metric that I think is a pretty good one is per mile driven, what's the accident rate? And right now, I'm in a Tesla, and when it's on assisted driving mode, branded as autopilot, but of course I can't sleep in the back of the car, but when it's on assisted driving mode, what's the percent? It was more than 4 times safer than me driving statistically per mile driven. Now it's way past that. So a useful metric, I think, is if autopilot's on versus autopilot's not on, how many accidents are there per mile? And luckily accidents aren't that common, right? That's pretty cool. They're not that common. But I'll say I just bumped my rear bumper today backing out of a weird parking spot because I didn't ask my Tesla to do it for me. And it never bumps anything because it's really good at that kind of thing. So that's one reason, is the accidents driven per mile. It's simply lower risk. Now, another is because I'm fairly familiar with the technology stack, and I have a little bit, an armchair interest in neuroscience, which is the human technology stack. And the software and hardware technology stack is just way better than the human wetware when it comes for silly rote decisions like, how do I stay in a lane and deal with a semi that's trying to cut me off? I mean, if it comes to how to make a brilliant sonnet that will speak to people by hearkening measures of their childhood, AI is actually not that bad at that, but humans are still better. But when it comes to doing something menial like driving in the snow, the hardware technology stack is simply a better fit because of the speed at which it can aggregate certain types of tagged 4D images. So part of it is some level of familiarity with the hardware and software stack and the wetware stack underneath. But I think the service metric is even better. Now, do I think my car will never kill me? It's totally possible. Do I think it is less likely to kill me than I am likely to kill me? Yes. So my Tesla might do something really dumb and decapitate me. But man, if I am not way more likely to do that. So the technology is not perfect, but it is saving me from myself. So that is my longer answer to yes.
All right, perfect. Maybe just a quick little thing. I have I didn't run this by you, but I have some rapid fire round of questions. And so these are ones that I never share in advance or lighthearted. You can answer in like one word or you can give it an elaboration. So, Joe, are you ready for the rapid fire?
Absolutely.
Okay. Morning or night?
Night.
Mac or PC?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Tea or coffee?
Coffee, but tea has its place.
All right, perfect.
Tea and biscuits, absolutely. Tea in the afternoon, absolutely. But in general, a nice dark coffee with chocolate or brandy or whiskey.
All right. Well, we talked about like singers before. Justin Bieber or Drake?
Carly Rae Jepsen.
All right. What about Backstreet Boys or NSYNC?
I mean, Hanging Tough has got a special part in my young adult development. But to see the Trolls movie with Timberlake, I mean, it's got to end up being in sync after all.
Yeah. What age do you want to retire?
I did around 30, and that was good. But I like to stay involved and busy. Now that said, I don't think I can just sustain indefinitely without making any money anymore. I made some pretty dumb real estate decisions. Just fact, I did. But I'm near retirement again. I can kind of choose what time I want to wake up, and I think that's an important metric. Now that said, I really like to be engaged and passionately involved. So I think that is what I'll do anyway, even if I have complete control of my time again. But already I'm pretty close to control of my time. So 30.
Okay. And, especially for the students and stuff, what would be one piece of advice that you would give to your younger self?
Are you ready? My younger self didn't have access to it, but some people do. Go work for a Musk company. Just go do it. And it's as hard as you think. No, it's harder than you think, but you can do it. You can. I saw borderline drunk homeless people that pulled it off. And I saw MBAs from MIT Sloan pull it off. So there's a wide range of skill set, experience, and background that can pull it off. So you can. It's going to be hard. Do it. Make it for 30 days. If you can, make it for longer. Do it as long as you can. And then be simply successful the whole rest of your life because you understand.
Awesome. Is there any kind of last closing comments that you want to make?
I would like to move to Canada. Let's figure out how to make this happen. There's good coffee. People understand how alcohol pairs with food. There's a lot of ice, but you know what? People know how to use the winter weather. It's all good. Let's rock Canada.
Well, we'll figure out a way. I mean, especially like Chris mentioned this, but like I don't know how much you know about with Calgary, but we do have the youngest per capita, some of the most educated per capita.
Whoa.
So I think we have all the various attributes, and even you talked about like AI side of things. So a lot of people don't realize this, but Google, which owns DeepMind, their actual research and development side of things is up at U of A, and now they're actually making a presence in Calgary as well. So
Canada is truly world leading in their AI understanding and investment, and it's backed by government policy. Like, it's really aligned. I have a tremendous amount of respect. Oh, yes, yes, and yes. Well, there is something I think is important that I'd like to end on. Thank you so much. Is I wish I knew more about the true neuroscience of it, but here's a little bit of something awesome that relates to neuroscience. It turns out when you smile a little bit, it actually triggers a release of oxytocin and serotonin and a whole bunch of other chemicals, but those two are more easy to measure. And it turns out we make better decisions, faster decisions. We're better at collaboration. Our people skills are better. We're superior empathy with each other when we do that. It's net a full win. Now, if you do this, you're laughing super hard. That's actually what we call manic. And we have so much oxytocin and serotonin and other chemicals that are a little harder to measure that we have very reduced decision-making capability, very reduced empathy. So that's not the point. It's not to be funny in a laugh out loud, hold your gut way. That has its place when you want to decompress, but that's not at work. Meanwhile, if you do this one, furrow your brow, that seems to trigger a release of a different batch of chemicals. The most easiest to measure is cortisol, but it's a whole host of chemicals, a whole mix, and it actually reduces our ability to think critically. It reduces our estimation accuracy. It reduces our measured engineering quality. It has a number of damaging business attributes. So what it looks like the real game is, how do you have a slight smile more often in a way that the people you're working with or around or everyone also has a slight smile more often? That seems to be really the game. And then automate everything, a bunch of robots.
Well, thank you, Joe. That's a great note to end on. I just wanted to say, with some of the other students, some of the other questions, you have tons of like TED Talks and like papers. You've been featured in Forbes, the Harvard Business Review, things like that. So, and your Twitter handle. So we'll link to all of that when we end up posting this on our YouTube, and then as well with our podcast and all of that. We'll throw in some of your greatest hits and things like that. So
what I'll ask you to do, Chris and Chris, is please tweet at me or have someone tweet at me or have the UCalgary business account tweet at me the unanswered questions from the business account, and I'll answer them because I answer everything that's tweeted to me. So I'll hit every question then, and that way it's in a public forum that helps build the possibility of a continued conversation around what we're talking about associated with Calgary and Calgary business. So I'll request that. And if you do, I'll answer them.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. So
yeah, no, perfect. The students themselves can even take up some of that. So sorry, Chris, I cut you off. Yeah.
Yeah. And, Joe, so is that the best way that people can connect with you is through Twitter?
It's maybe the lowest bar, the absolute easiest. And I check it the most often because, I can just check it when I'm going to the bathroom. Like, seriously, you just check it all the time. And it just doesn't take much prep. But LinkedIn is also great because the professional community that chooses to follow each other is deep. So if you send a LinkedIn message to me publicly, if you post a message and tag me on LinkedIn, not only will I see it, but a whole bunch of other people who like the stuff I like will see it too. So you'll get a lot more opinion than just mine. So that's a really good way. But I'll say LinkedIn's a higher bar because I sit down and I think about it. It lasts longer. Perceived lasts longer. So I won't answer as fast, but you'll get a lot more answers than just mine. So that's an awesome way too.
All right, awesome. Yeah, so we'll be sure to go and take all the questions. So for those of you, you can still submit them on Slido, and then we'll get them to you. Joe will try his best to get back to you on that. Oh, and by the way, Tatiana said that it shouldn't be hard for you to get immigration here. I guess it's on a point system.
Okay. See you in Calgary.
All right. Well, thank you again, Joe, for taking the time out of your schedule.
Absolutely my pleasure. I love it. It's an honor to guest lecture in a way with you. Absolutely into it. Oh, I do have a series of academic papers that I want to get over the finish line. Please
Yeah.
contact Chris Hans about that. I need help choosing a journal and then having them edited to fit said journal and submitting them for publication. And by need help, I mean, please do it for me. Take my research and my drafts and do everything for me and tell me it's done. I need that. So if you want to get co-authored on a set of papers with me, I'm ready for it.
Yeah, no, for sure. We're communicating on that. So if anybody who's attending, feel free to drop us a line. You can get a hold of me as well. So my website is Chris with a K, KRISHANS.ca, and you can go and email me and find all my social media accounts there as well. All right.
Thanks so much, Joe.
Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, everybody. See you again before too long. Let's do it again. Bye-bye.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely.
Take care.
Take care.
Have a safe drive.